Hi, this is Tom Vander Ark from Getting Smart. This is a Smart Cities Hangout. Today we're hanging out with Nick Donohue from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. Hey, Nick.
Hey Tom, how are you?
I'm great. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for
Uh,
having
today,
me.
today we're talking about community engagement. And Nick, I've heard you say that many education leaders have not benefited from some recent research when it comes to real community engagement, and that they operate with some old misconceptions about community engagement. What are a couple of those?
Well, Tom, we've done a bunch of research through a group called the Frameworks Institute, and it shines some light on some very interesting findings. I think people know that it's common to think that our public wants an education system that they used to have or that they thought they used to have. That the way to move things forward is to go backwards. And we also understand that they have a deep concern for their own children or children close to them, that they have some real interest at hand. And both those things are true, but it turns out that those are not the only perspectives people can have, and it's not true that those perspectives are permanent. There are ways to really reframe the engagement, if you will, and get people to start thinking ahead instead of just looking back.
So ringing the bell of crisis doesn't sound like it's one of those productive ways.
Right. So part what the research tells us, and sort of makes sense, in some simple ways, that if people are in a crisis, it's not necessarily something they want to stop and fix, especially if they're with their loved ones. They want to get out. So it explains why
Yeah.
people have a idea that they want to kind of move away from public school systems rather than really renovate them, or they want to force fix them rather than really be thoughtful about improving them.
Your friends at you've talked about frameworks, and here's an interesting quote from them: "Unframed conversations about education blame parents, teachers, or students." So
Yes.
it's not just having a conversation, right? The thoughtful education leaders actually have to create a framework.
Right. So part of that research came from our request of frameworks to ask us what people thought about systems change. And people have a frame around systems change. It's just that it's very different from those of us who are working on systems change. So when you ask the public, and these are very persistent views, to think about the system of education, they'll define it as a relationship between three people: teacher, parent, and the student. So naturally, if you want to fix the system, where that leads you is that you need to fix one of those three people. And we've all been through that before. You got to either fix the
Right.
students or fix the teachers or wish there were different parents. So, and again, it turns out that if you frame it a little differently, if you talk about the system being like an orchestra that
Right.
has different sections playing in harmony, it's very easy for people to move and talk about finance or assessment. But given that these folks have busy lives, they got their own things to focus on more fully, it's
Right.
really very fast how this kind of framing happens, and that's the first place people go. Is there's just not much to a system unless you put it to them a little differently.
Right. And frameworks actually says that education systems are invisible, which makes reform unimaginable, right? So you've
Yeah.
talked about creating a picture so people know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
Right. So we talk about, and it sounds, it's interesting. It sounds kind of simple, but you provide these metaphors to people, and these metaphors endure. The process for studying this is to come up with a metaphor that helps unlock a conversation, like the orchestra I just used, and then to see whether it persists through a series of focus groups. Can people really stick with it? Will it endure? Does it provide a vehicle or a frame to have the conversation? And that one is particularly good. People say, well, the orchestra, that's a very kind of high class, upper class frame. Well, it turns out that everybody understands what an orchestra is.
Yeah.
It's a complex system that's got a lot of parts that work together. And there are
So,
others that are very powerful as well.
so tapping into these core values that may be a better sort of pathway to learning innovations. What are those core values?
Right. So in the current situation, when we talk about crisis or talk about fixing things or talk about needing help, it triggers values around individualism and just being secure and safe. But it turns out that when you frame things in terms of preparing communities for a positive future, if you leverage pragmatism, if you leverage working together to achieve something. Americans love individualism. They love competition. They love finding out who's the best, and they love being prepared, and they love being pragmatic, and they love looking ahead and getting ready. I mean, we're a pioneer country, and so that frame works also, and it really opens up these conversations about what do we need to do next, not how can we go back to what we thought we had that we never really had.
Fairness is another idea that most people are drawn to, right?
Yes, fairness is a very positive one. I'm glad you mentioned that. When we talk about issues around equity, it turns out that when you talk about the differences between different subgroups of people, that it doesn't really play very well. It triggers a lot of individualism, a lot of thoughts about kind of just nature versus nurture, if you will. So when we say when we talk about fairness between groups of people, you don't want to be part of a marginalized, disenfranchised, underserved population. It just does not frame very well. People think that's not really a matter of any kind of social or institutional influence. That's a family matter. That's a cultural matter. That's a matter about the nature of different ethnicities or racial groups. I mean, it drives us to some pretty negative frames that don't have much to do with improving school. If you frame things as fairness between communities, it turns out that people have more of an appetite for remediating and equalizing and rebalancing. It explains, I think, why we're all, somewhat open to. We pay taxes on Superfund cleanups that don't have anything to do with us, but it's not fair that people should be sitting on Love Canal or a burning coal mine. We get that that's not fair. So the prospects for equalizing resources and really attention across communities is better than across individual groups, and it is rooted in fairness, a very strong sense of what's fair.
So let's wrap up just by talking about sort of specific tactics. Give us a sense of what you think this looks like for education leaders. Are PTA meetings still the best place to engage, or should folks be using social media, or is it a combination? What's your take?
Well, I think it's a combination. There's no PTA that's not using social media to talk about their business. So I think building on the current constructs that are familiar, there are parents and community leaders who've stepped up, whether it's a teacher group, a community group, a parent group, a school board frame. So what we're trying to do at the foundation is really find some places that want to engage in this conversation, to test some of the research I've described, and to take a chance on the intelligence and commitment and interest of people to move their communities forward. So there's a risk there because there are competing agendas. We know some people are louder than others. It's certainly a place where people could bring their own issues and subvert a process. But we don't see any alternative moving forward. The big change we need in this country educationally is not a technical fix that technocrats or bureaucrats like we have been are going to solve. It's a cultural shift about moving from a system that sorts and batch processes kids to one that really focuses on universal attainment. And you can make that shift with the public. They're ready to try some new things, and we're gonna try some things with them.
Do you have to try stuff around the edges of the system? Is that the best approach?
Say that one more time.
Well, does innovation happen at the edges of the system, or through deep engagement, do you think you can really create innovation at the core?
Yeah, I think it's actually a combination. I think you want to drive an appetite for innovation in a broad-based way, where you are really enlisting community leaders to say, we are going to try some new things. But it's got to look a little bit more like an R&D effort that has some secure space. I think some of the mistakes we make are we enthuse people with a change, and then we try to change the whole thing all at once. And the work we've done suggests get significant buy-in and interest in the big change, and then try it and grow it in a way where people can see it mature. Because it's tough to move everybody all at once. Find some willing folks. It probably involves thinking about some kids and their families stepping up to try some new things. But we're concerned that the do it all at once for everybody will not be necessarily as fruitful as just getting it going well in a space and seeing it grow.
So I really appreciate your focus on this, because you're a leading supporter of student-centered learning, these competency-based approaches, and some some deployments of student-centered and competency-based learning end up being quite controversial, in part, I think, because leaders haven't done the homework with their community.
Right, it's true. It's true. You know, there are two things. One, some of them aren't very good. That's another reason people don't like them. So the variety is not always of all high quality.
Right.
But we've done an analysis of a whole bunch of media reports about school board meetings and the complaints that parents bring, and it's very interesting. People really like the ideas that are promoted in student-centered learning. They get personalization. Competency is not a hard idea to get. They think we've been advancing kids when they're competent. They don't. They're wondering, what have we been doing all these years? They get anywhere, anytime learning. It's time. What they have the biggest issues with is communication about implementation, and that's pretty classic. Schools and school districts have not had to be very clear. It reminds me of sort of the myth around the phenomena of new math years ago. You know, new way of doing math. You don't have place value the same way. People were in uproar, and it's because nobody explained it to them. Nobody shared the info. We tried to do it despite them. So engaging people and getting ahead with them, it just seems like they are that dark matter. You know, there's a lot of energy in the universe, and leveraging the people who care the most. We have a great country. It's based on community engagement. We got issues, but unlocking the future of schooling is about engaging people directly and trusting them again.
That's a great place to stop. Nick, we really appreciate your time and your insights on engagement. We've created a whole chapter in the Smart Cities book on this subject, really because of your input. So we appreciate and respect the work you're doing.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for your leadership.
Thanks.